Hello, this is David Sneathen with Alpha Omega Revelation, and we're on the Beatitudes. So if you were following along on the playlist, the last episode, all I did was read from Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, a collection of scripture commonly known as the Sermon on the Mount, the teachings of Jesus to the disciples. So, this is chapter 6 in our book, The Cost of Discipleship, and this is going to be about the Beatitudes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. Let me begin. Let us picture the scene. Jesus on the mountain, the multitudes and the disciples. The people see Jesus with his disciples, who have gathered around him. Until quite recently, these men have been completely identified with the multitude. They were just like the rest. Then came the call of Jesus, and at once they left all and followed him. Since then, they have belonged to him, body and soul. Now they go with him, live with him, and follow him wherever he leads them. Something unique had occurred to them. That disconcerting and offensive fact stares the people in the face. The disciples see the people, from whose midst they themselves have come. These people are the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the elect people of God, the national church. When the call of Jesus had selected them from among the people, the disciples had done what for the lost sheep of the house of Israel was only natural and necessary thing to do. The only natural and necessary thing to do. They had followed the voice of the Good Shepherd, because they knew his voice. Thus their very action in enlisting as disciples proves that they are members of his people. They will live among them, going into their midst and preaching the call of Jesus and the glory of discipleship. But what will the end be? Jesus sees his disciples. They have publicly left the crowd to join him. He has called them, every one, and they have renounced everything at his call. Now they are living in want and privation, the poorest of the poor, the sorest afflicted, and the hungriest of the hungry. They have only him, and with him they have nothing, literally nothing in the world, but everything with and through God. But a little flock. Did I turn 2 pages? No. But a little flock he has found, and it is a great flock he is seeking. I think we're missing a verb. It is but a little flock he has found, and it is a great flock he is seeking as he looks at the people. Disciples and people, they belong together. The disciples will be his messengers, and here and there they will find men to hear and believe their message. Yet there will be enmity between them right to the bitter end. All the wrath of God's people against him and his word will fall on his disciples. His rejection will be theirs. The cross casts its shadow before Christ, the disciples, and the people. The stage is already set for the passion of Jesus and his church. Therefore, Jesus calls his disciples blessed. He spoke to men who had already responded to the power of his call, and it is that call which has made them poor, afflicted, and hungry. He calls them blessed not because of their privation or the renunciation they have made, for these are not blessed in themselves. Only the call and the promise for the sake of which they are ready to suffer poverty and renunciation can justify the Beatitudes. Admittedly, Jesus sometimes speaks of privation and sometimes of deliberate renunciation as if they implied particular virtues in his disciples. But that is neither here nor there. External privation and personal renunciation both have the same ground, the call and the promise of Jesus. Neither possesses any intrinsic claim to recognition. Jesus calls his disciples blessed in the hearing of the crowd, and the crowd is called upon as a startled witness. The heritage which God had promised to Israel as a whole is here attributed to the little flock of disciples whom Jesus had chosen. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, but disciples and people are one, for they are all members of the church which is called of God. Hence, the aim of this beatitude is to bring all who hear it to decision and salvation. All are called to be what, in the reality of God, they are already. The disciples are called blessed because they have obeyed the call of Jesus, and the people as a whole because they are heirs of the promise. But will they now claim their heritage by believing in Jesus Christ and his word? Or will they fall into apostasy by refusing to accept him? That is the question which still remains to be answered. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Privation is the lot of the disciples in every sphere of their lives. They are the poor, to kor, Luke 6:20. They have no security, no possessions to call their own, not even a foot of earth to call their home, no earthly society to claim their absolute obedience. Nay, more, they have no spiritual power, experience, or knowledge to afford them consolation or security. For his sake they have lost all. In following him they lost even their own selves and everything that could make them rich. Now they are poor, so inexperienced, so stupid, that they have no other hope but him who called them. Jesus knows all about the others too, the representatives and preachers of the national religion, who enjoy greatness and renown, whose feet are firmly planted on the earth, who are deeply rooted in the culture and piety of the people and molded by the spirit of the age. Yet it is not they, but the disciples who are called blessed. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That kingdom dawns on them, the little band who, for the sake of Jesus, live a life of absolute renunciation and poverty. And in that very poverty, they are heirs of his kingdom. They have their treasure in secret, they find it on the cross, and they have the promise that they will one day visibly enjoy the glory of the kingdom, which in principle is already realized in the utter poverty of the cross. This beatitude is poles removed from the caricatures of it which appear in political and social manifestos. The Antichrist also calls the poor blessed, but not for the sake of the cross, which embraces all poverty and transforms it into a source of blessing. He fights the cross with political and sociological ideology. He may call it Christian, but that only makes him a still more dangerous enemy. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. With each beatitude, the gulf is widened between the disciples and the people. Their call to come forth from the people becomes increasingly manifest. By mourning Jesus, of course, means doing without what the world calls peace and prosperity. He means refusing to be in tune with the world or to accommodate oneself to its standards. Such men mourn for the world, for its guilt, its fate, and its fortune. While the world keeps holiday, they stand aside, and while the world sings, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, they mourn. They see that for all the jollity on board, the ship is beginning to sink. The world dreams of progress, of power, and of the future, but the disciples meditate on the end, the last judgment, and the coming of the kingdom. To such heights the world cannot rise, and so the disciples are strangers in the world, unwelcome guests, and disturbers of the peace. No wonder the world rejects them. Why does the Christian church so often have to look on from outside when the nation is celebrating? Have churchmen no understanding and sympathy for their fellow men? Have they become victims of misanthropy? Nothing loves his fellow men better than a disciple. Nobody understands his fellow men better than the Christian fellowship, and that very love impels them to stand aside and mourn. It was a happy and suggestive thought of Luther to translate the Greek word here by the German Leidtragen, sorrow-bearing, for the emphasis lies on the bearing of sorrow. The disciple community does not shake off sorrow as though it were no concern of its own, but willingly bears it, and in this way they show how close are the bonds which bind them to the rest of humanity. But at the same time they do not go out of their way to look for suffering or try to contract out of it by adopting an attitude of contempt and disdain. They simply bear the suffering which comes their way as they try to follow Jesus Christ, and bear it for his sake. Sorrow cannot tire them or wear them down. It cannot embitter them or cause them to break down under the strain. Far from it, for they bear their sorrow in the strength of him who bears them up, who bore the whole suffering of the world upon the cross. They stand as the bearers of sorrow in the fellowship of the crucified. They stand as strangers in the world in the power of him who was such a stranger to the world that it crucified him. This is their comfort, or better still, this man is their comfort, the Comforter. Cross-reference Luke chapter 2:25. The community of strangers finds their comfort in the cross. They are comforted by being cast upon the place where the Comforter of Israel awaits them. Thus do they find their true home with their crucified Lord, both here and in eternity. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This community of strangers possesses no inherent right of its own to protect its members in the world, nor do they claim such rights, for they are meek. They renounce every right of their own and live for the sake of Jesus Christ. When reproached, they hold their peace. When treated with violence, they endure it patiently. When men drive them from their presence, they yield their ground. They will not go to law to defend their rights, or make a scene when they suffer injustice, nor do they insist on their legal rights. They are determined to leave their rights to God alone. Non cupidi vindicte, as the ancient church paraphrased it. Their right is in the will of the Lord, that and no more. They show by every word and gesture that they do not belong to this earth. Leave heaven to them, says the world in its pity. That is where they belong. But Jesus says, they shall inherit the earth. To these, the powerless and the disenfranchised, the very earth belongs. Those who now possess it by violence and injustice shall lose it, and those who here have utterly renounced it, who were meek to the point of the cross, shall rule the new earth. We must not interpret this as a reference to God's exercise of juridical punishment within the world, as Calvin did. What it means is that when the kingdom of heaven descends, the face of the earth will be renewed, and it will belong to the flock of Jesus. God does not forsake the earth. He made it. He sent his Son to it, and on it he built his church. Thus, a beginning has already been made in this present age. A sign has been given. The powerless have here and now received a plot of earth, for they have the church and its fellowship, its goods, its brothers and sisters, in the midst of persecutions, even to the length of the cross. The renewal of the earth begins at Golgotha, where the meek one died, and from thence it will spread. When the kingdom finally comes, the meek shall possess the earth. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Not only do the followers of Jesus renounce their rights, they renounce their own righteousness too. They get no praise for their achievements or sacrifices. They cannot have righteousness except by hungering and thirsting for it. This applies equally to their own righteousness and to the righteousness of God on earth. Always they look forward to the future righteousness of God, but they cannot establish it for themselves. Those who follow Jesus grow hungry and thirsty on the way. They are longing for the forgiveness of all sin, for complete renewal, for the renewal too of the earth and the full establishment of God's law. They are still involved in the world's curse and affected by its sin. He whom they follow must die accursed on the cross, with a desperate cry for righteousness on his lips. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? But the disciple is not above his master. He follows in his steps. Happy are they who have the promise that they shall be filled, for the righteousness they receive will be no empty promise, but real satisfaction. They will eat the bread of life in the messianic feast. They are blessed because they already enjoy this bread here and now, for in their hunger they are sustained by the bread of life, the bliss of sinners. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. these men without possessions or power, these strangers on earth, these sinners, these followers of Jesus have in their life with them renounced their own dignity, for they are merciful. As if their own needs and their own distress were not enough, they take upon themselves the distress and humiliation and sin of others. They have an irresistible love for the downtrodden, the sick, the wretched, the wronged, the outcast, and all who are tortured with anxiety. They go out and seek all who are enmeshed in the toils of sin and guilt. No distress is too great, no sin too appalling for their pity. If any man falls into disgrace, the merciful will sacrifice their own honor to shield him, and take his shame upon themselves. They will be found consorting with publicans and sinners, careless of the shame they incur thereby. In order that they may be merciful, they cast away the most priceless treasure of human life, their personal dignity and honor. For the only honor and dignity they know is their Lord's own mercy, to which alone they owe their very lives. He was not ashamed of his disciples. He became the brother of mankind, and bore their shame unto the death of the cross. That is how Jesus, the crucified, was merciful. His followers owe their lives entirely to that mercy. It makes them forget their own honor and dignity, and seek the society of sinners. They are glad to incur reproach, for they know that then they are blessed. One day God himself will come down and take upon himself their sin and shame. He will cover them with his own honor and remove their disgrace. It will be his glory to bear the shame of sinners and to clothe them with his honor. Blessed are the merciful, for they have the merciful for their Lord. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Who is the pure in heart? Only those who have surrendered their hearts completely to Jesus, that he may reign in them alone. Only those whose hearts are undefiled by their own evil and by their own virtues too. The pure in heart have a childlike simplicity like Adam before the fall, innocent alike of good and evil. Their hearts are not ruled by their conscience, but by the will of Jesus. If men renounce their own good, if in penitence they have renounced their own hearts, if they rely solely upon Jesus, then his word purifies their hearts. Purity of heart is here contrasted with all outward purity, even the purity of high intentions. The pure heart is pure alike of good and evil. It belongs exclusively to Christ and looks only to him who goes on before. Only they will see God who in this life have looked solely unto Jesus Christ, the Son of God. For then their hearts are free from all defiling fantasies and are not distracted by conflicting desires and intentions. They are wholly absorbed by the contemplation of God. They shall see God, whose hearts have become a reflection of the image of Jesus Christ. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. The followers of Jesus have been called to peace. When he called them, they found their peace, for he is their peace. But now they are told that they must not only have peace, but make it. And to that end they renounce all violence and tumult. In the case of Christ, nothing is to be gained by such methods. His kingdom is one of peace, and the mutual greeting of his flock is a greeting of peace. His disciples keep the peace by choosing to endure suffering themselves rather than inflict it on others. They maintain fellowship where others would break it off. They renounce all self-assertion and quietly suffer in the face of hatred and wrong. In so doing, they overcome evil with good and establish the peace of God in the midst of a world of war and hate. But nowhere will that peace be more manifest than where they meet the wicked in peace and are ready to suffer at their hands. The peacemakers will carry the cross with their Lord, for it was on the cross that peace was made. Now that they are partners in Christ's work of reconciliation, they are called the sons of God, as he is the Son of God. Blessed are they that have been persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This does not refer to the righteousness of God, but to the suffering in a just cause, suffering for their own just judgments and actions. For it is by these that they who renounce possessions, fortune, rights, righteousness, honor, and force, but for the sake of following Christ, will be distinguished from the world. The world will be offended at them, and so the disciples will be persecuted for righteousness' sake. Not recognition, but rejection is the reward they get from the world for their message and their works. It is important that Jesus gives his blessing not merely to suffering incurred directly for the confession of his name, but to suffering in any just cause. They receive the same promise as the poor, for in persecution they are their equals in poverty. Having reached the end of the Beatitudes, we naturally ask if there is any place on this earth for the community which they describe. Clearly, there is one place, and only one, and that is where the poorest, meekest, and most sorely tried of all men is to be found, the cross of Golgotha. The fellowship of the Beatitudes is the fellowship of the crucified. With him it has lost all, and with him it has found all. From the cross there comes the call, Blessed, blessed. The last beatitude is addressed directly to the disciples, for only they can understand it. Blessed are ye, when men shall reproach you, and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. For my sake the disciples are reproached, but because it is for his sake, the reproach falls on him. It is he who bears the guilt. The curse, the deadly persecution, and evil slander confirm the blessed state of the disciples in their fellowship with Jesus. It could not be otherwise, for these meek strangers are bound to provoke the world to insult, violence, and slander. Too menacing, too loud are the voices of these poor, meek men, too patient and too silent their suffering. Too powerful are the testimony of their poverty and their endurance of the wrongs of the world. This is fatal, and so, while Jesus calls them blessed, the world cries, Away with them! Away with them! Yes, but whither? To the kingdom of heaven. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. There shall the poor be seen in the halls of joy. With his own hand God wipes away the tears from the eyes of those who have mourned upon the earth. He feeds the hungry at his banquet. There stand the scarred bodies of the martyrs, now glorified and clothed in the white robes of eternal righteousness, instead of the rags of sin and repentance. The echoes of this joy reach the little flock below as it stands beneath the cross, and they hear Jesus saying, Blessed are ye. And that's the end of chapter 6. So I hope that you're enjoying this little book, one of my favorites, The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So we will continue with chapter 7 next time, and I hope to see you there.